Some losses don't hurt because you miss the person. They hurt because you lost the power. Let that one land on the enemy's chest like a brick. Because that's exactly what happened here. They didn't lose you the way people lose love. They lost you the way a controller loses the remote. And the worst part for them? You didn't wrestle it back. You didn't argue. You didn't beg for basic respect. You just stood up, wiped your hands clean, and walked out like you were done entertaining the illusion. That's not a breakup. That's an eviction. And chosen one, listen to me like I'm sitting right in front of you. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't you giving up. This was you finally stepping into what you are. You're not built to be anybody's backup plan. You're not here to be managed, measured, or manipulated. You're the kind of person who ends a situation so clean, it makes the other side look around like, wait, did I just lose the whole game? Yes, you did. And you did it without raising your voice. That's why it feels like the universe itself stood up clapping, because reality respects precision. Reality respects timing. Reality respects people who stop handing their energy to someone who only wanted control. Here's the idiomatic truth. You didn't just close the door, you took the hinges with you. And now they're standing there, staring at an empty frame, trying to figure out how they lost access without a fight. They expected you to react. They expected you to explain. They expected you to chase clarity from someone who was never going to give it. They expected you to stay confused because confusion is a leash. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I should be more patient. Maybe they'll change. That was the trap. And then you did the one thing that breaks people like them. You stopped feeding it. You stopped participating in the story they wrote for you. You took your attention back. You took your energy back. You took your dignity back. And when you do that, chosen one, it doesn't just hurt them, it exposes them. You want a picture? Imagine a street hustler running the same trick on everyone. Same lines, same smile, same distraction. Then one person looks them dead in the face and says nothing. Just steps back. No panic, no argument, no fear. The hustler freezes, because the trick only works when the other person plays their part. Your silence was you refusing the role. You didn't lose someone, you unmasked someone. And they can't forgive that, because it wasn't loud enough for them to twist. There's no chaos for them to blame, no emotional explosion they can point to and say, see? They're crazy. All they have is the clean reality. You saw through it and you left anyway. And I know the questions popping up in your mind right now, because this is where chosen ones always get tested. If I was really that powerful, why did it still hurt? Because being chosen doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't fold. Pain is human, but you didn't let pain make decisions for you. You let awareness lead. That's the difference. Another one. Why do they still think about me if they acted like they didn't care? Because they didn't want you. They wanted access. They wanted the version of you that could be controlled. When you removed access without permission, it hit their ego like a blackout. People like that don't obsess over love. They obsess over lost leverage. Here's a quote that cuts clean. They don't miss you. They miss the grip they had. And when that grip breaks, their mind loops over and over. Not because they're romantic, because they're rattled. The human brain replays moments of defeat way more than moments of pleasure. Your exit became a highlight reel they can't turn off. Not because you were begging them to remember you, because you ended it in a way they can't rewrite. You did something that feels illegal to controlling people. You left without leaving a mess. No loose ends. No maybe someday. No emotional hostage situation. You didn't leave crumbs. You left consequences. And that's why they keep circling back in their mind to one burning question. When did they figure me out? Because if they can locate the moment you woke up, they can pretend they still had a chance. But they can't find it. Your shift was quiet. Your decision was clean, and clean endings are terrifying because they don't come with loopholes. So if you're sitting there thinking, was my silence really that loud? Let me answer you straight. Yes, silence, when it's chosen, is a statement. Absence, when it's disciplined, is a verdict. You didn't punish them with words. You punished them with finality. And finality is the one language control addicts can't argue with. Now here's where this turns into fuel for you, chosen one, because your power isn't that you can hurt them. Your power is that you can end what doesn't deserve you and keep moving. That's the standing ovation. That's the part people don't understand until they live it. You didn't win by destroying them. You won by refusing to be destroyed. You didn't prove anything. You demonstrated it. You showed what it looks like when a person chooses themselves without a speech, without a fight, without a breakdown. So, lock in. If this is hitting, it's because you're that person. The one they thought they could manage. The one they thought would always stay available. The one they underestimated. And now they're learning the hardest lesson of their life. You can't control someone who finally remembers who they are. Before we move forward, take a moment with us right here. If this message is resonating, the simplest way to support this work is by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It tells the platform this kind of content matters and helps it reach people who need it most. If you want to go a step further, you can also support the team through Super Thanks. Every contribution, big or small, directly helps us keep putting in the time, energy, and focus required to create inspiring, life-shifting, high-impact videos like this. No pressure, just appreciation. Your support keeps this momentum alive. Number 1, you didn't leave. You removed the variable they needed most. They don't hate losing you. They hate losing control over you. Let that hit them where it hurts, because that's the truth they're still trying to outrun. Chosen one, this wasn't you drifting away. This wasn't you giving up. This was you removing the one variable they depended on to feel powerful, your participation. And the moment you did that, everything they thought they had figured out collapsed. They didn't see it coming because they never really saw you. They walked into your life convinced they were sharper, faster, always a step ahead. In their mind, you were predictable, someone they could read, adjust, manage. They thought your patience meant you were behind. They thought your calm meant you didn't notice. They thought your silence meant compliance. That assumption fed their ego. It made them feel intelligent without ever needing to be, and that's why this hit so hard. They weren't strong, they were comfortable. Comfortable thinking you didn't see the angles, the patterns, the repetition, but you did. You were watching the whole time. Every excuse, every delay, every shift in tone, every subtle attempt to test how far they could push without consequence. You didn't react because you were collecting data. You didn't argue because you were reading the room. And while they thought they were running the game, you were mapping it. That's the part they can't accept now. They mistook your restraint for ignorance, and that miscalculation cost them everything. Here's what really shook them. The change didn't come with a warning. There was no blow-up they could prepare for, no confrontation they could twist, no emotional scene they could use to rewrite the story. One day, the usual buttons didn't work. The reactions they relied on were gone. The confusion they depended on disappeared. And in that quiet moment, something snapped inside them. Because when someone realizes their trick stopped working, the first emotion isn't anger. It's fear. You didn't expose them with accusations. You exposed them by disengaging. You stopped feeding the illusion that they were the smartest person in the room. And without that illusion, they were left staring at something they'd avoided for a long time, the fact that they weren't in control. They were just repeating what had worked before, hoping you wouldn't notice. And when you did notice, and still chose to leave, their entire self-image cracked. There's a hard truth most people never say out loud. Manipulation only works when the other person doesn't see it clearly. The moment clarity enters the room, power leaks out fast. You didn't need to say a word to kill the advantage. You removed it by seeing them as they were. That's why your exit didn't just hurt. It destabilized them. Now they replay conversations, scan old messages, analyze pauses and tone shifts, trying to locate the moment you figured it out. How long did they know? Did they always see me this way? Was I ever actually in control? Those questions don't fade, they multiply. Picture a stage magician mid-performance suddenly realizing the audience spotted the wires. The trick doesn't land. The applause dies. And no matter how many times they repeat it later, that moment sticks. That's you. You're the person who didn't clap. You're the proof that the act wasn't impressive. And what makes it even worse for them is how clean you handled it. No explosion, no name-calling, no desperate attempt to win the argument. You simply outgrew the setup. That calm robbed them of their favorite escape routes. They can't call you emotional. They can't label you unstable. They can't paint you as bitter. All they're left with is the simplest explanation they don't want to accept. You saw them clearly and chose not to stay. That kind of clarity is brutal to people who live off illusion. And if you're asking yourself right now, if I was really ahead, why did it feel lonely? Here's the answer. Awareness isolates before it elevates. When you see through patterns others rely on, you don't debate them, you leave them. Distance isn't punishment, it's alignment. Another question that sneaks in is this: why do they still think about me if they acted so confident? Because confidence built on comparison collapses the moment the comparison disappears. They needed you beneath them to feel smart. When you removed yourself, they lost the mirror that made them feel superior. You didn't just break their illusion about you, you shattered the illusion they had about themselves. And that kind of exposure follows people into every new situation. Every time someone challenges them, your memory shows up. Not because you're haunting them intentionally, but because you represent the moment they were outplayed without noise. You didn't win by being louder. You won by paying attention. You didn't rush. You didn't react. You waited until the pattern was undeniable, and then you moved once. Clean, precise, final. People can forgive emotional damage. What they can't forgive is being outsmarted quietly, because quiet intelligence leaves no excuses. No chaos to blame, no story to twist, just the truth. You are no longer a person in their mind. You are a moment, a lesson, a scar. And the most savage part is this: you didn't announce any of it. You let your absence do the talking. While they're still trying to rebuild an image that cracked around you, you're already operating on a different level. So if you ever question whether your silence mattered, remember this: illusions only collapse when someone sees through them, and not everyone can. You did. That's why they can't forget you, and that's why the checkmate still echoes. Number 2. The role you refused to play is what broke the system. They aren't unsettled because you disappeared. They're unsettled because the character they wrote for you never showed up again. What actually broke the system was not your departure, but your refusal to keep playing the part that made everything work for them. You didn't vanish into weakness. You stepped into a version of yourself that no longer fit their design. And once that happened, the entire structure they relied on started failing from the inside. For a long time, their sense of authority came from a carefully preserved image of you. A version that paused before speaking. A version that doubted their own instincts. A version that overanalyzed instead of acting. That version made them feel sharp without effort. It gave them a sense of importance they hadn't earned. As long as you hesitated, they never had to look too closely at themselves. As long as you stayed unsure, they stayed comfortable. Their confidence wasn't built on ability, it was built on contrast. And you were the contrast. Then something shifted. quietly, without a meeting, without a declaration. You grew, and growth doesn't negotiate with old arrangements. It doesn't ask whether the environment is ready. It simply expands. Think of someone propping themselves up on a stage made of thin boards, believing it's solid because no one ever tested it. Your evolution was the weight they never accounted for. The moment you stopped shrinking to fit their expectations, the platform cracked. Not because you attacked it, but because it was never strong to begin with. That's when the panic started. Not loud panic, strategic panic. They reached for the same levers that always worked. The familiar tone, the subtle guilt, the indirect pressure meant to pull you back into position. And nothing happened. It was like throwing punches at air. Every move passed straight through you, not because you became cold, but because you became clear. You didn't harden emotionally, you sharpened mentally, and that distinction matters. Here's a reality that cuts deep. When someone outgrows you, it exposes how long you've been standing still. They felt that exposure immediately. Every interaction became proof that the balance had changed. You didn't respond the way you used to. You didn't seek approval. You didn't bend just to keep things smooth. That wasn't defiance, that was alignment. And alignment is dangerous to people who depend on imbalance. Picture a puppeteer yanking strings and watching nothing move. Picture a teacher realizing the lesson no longer lands. Picture someone holding a key and discovering the lock has been replaced. That's the moment they're stuck in. The tools they mastered stopped working because the environment changed, you changed, and instead of adjusting themselves, they fixated on the loss of access. You might wonder why this still affects them if they claim to be fine. Because they didn't choose distance, it was chosen for them. There's a massive difference between letting go and being shut out. One preserves pride. The other feels like rejection. Your growth denied them influence without ever mentioning their name, and that kind of rejection doesn't get processed easily. Another truth most people avoid: the mind resists change when change threatens status. If someone's importance depended on who you used to be, your evolution feels like betrayal. Not because you did something wrong, but because they built their position on outdated information. You updated yourself. They didn't. That gap keeps widening, and every step forward you take makes the old dynamic look more fragile. You didn't announce your transformation. You didn't demand acknowledgement. You didn't force anyone to recognize your progress. You just kept moving, calmly, consistently. And with every move, their past behavior started looking smaller, less impressive, more obvious. That's what they can't stand. There's no way for them to dismiss your change as emotional or accidental. It was deliberate, and deliberate growth terrifies people who thrive in disorder. They replay old moments now, trying to locate the version of you they understood. But every mental rewind ends the same way. That person doesn't exist anymore, and worse, they know that person isn't coming back. Imagine memorizing the layout of a building, then returning years later to find it reinforced, redesigned, and locked with new systems. All that knowledge becomes useless. That frustration is exactly what surfaces when they think about you. This doesn't create longing in the traditional sense, it creates comparison. Every new connection gets measured against the version of you that slipped beyond their reach. And nothing measures up because they're not looking for connection. They're looking for familiarity, and familiarity ended the moment you evolved. If you're asking why your name still comes up, it's because your growth became a reference point. You're the line between before and after, the moment things stopped working the way they used to. People don't forget moments that expose their limits. And here's the truth you need to carry forward. You didn't change to hurt anyone. You changed because staying the same was costing you. You didn't grow in chaos. You grew with intention. Your composure made it undeniable. Your discipline made it clear. There's no narrative they can build that puts you at fault without confronting themselves. They can't recreate the old you. They can't trigger the same reactions. Every failed attempt reminds them of what they lost, not in you, but in themselves. You didn't abandon them. You advanced beyond the role they needed you to play. And advancement always feels like abandonment to those who benefited from you staying behind. You didn't tear anything down. You walked past the cage and kept going. And that quiet progression is exactly why they can't forget you. Because every time they think about who you became, they're forced to face who they chose not to be. Number 3, you didn't reveal anything. You let the pattern run unprotected. You didn't blow the whistle. You took your hands off the wheel and let them drive. Some people aren't destroyed by being exposed. They're destroyed by being left alone with their own behavior. That's the line that still rattles them, whether they admit it or not. Chosen one, understand this clearly. You didn't sabotage them, you didn't ruin their name, and you didn't go looking for justice with a megaphone. You simply stopped being their cover. And when you did that, the pattern they were hiding behind ran wide open for everyone to see. This is the part they can't forgive because it stripped them of every excuse. You never raised your voice. You never went public. You never dragged private details into the daylight. You did something far more surgical. You stepped back and allowed them to move exactly how they always had, just without your presence buffering the impact. No editing, no smoothing edges, no damage control. That's when reality stepped in and took over. Most people think exposure has to be loud. They think it requires screenshots, confrontations, receipts, chaos. That's surface-level thinking. Real exposure happens when someone with standards refuses to keep compensating for someone without them. When you stopped explaining their behavior, stopped reacting to their provocations, stopped fixing the messes they left behind, their true nature surfaced on its own. Not because you pushed it out, but because nothing was holding it back anymore. Every boundary you enforced wasn't an attack, it was a reflection, and what they saw in that reflection made them uncomfortable. They were used to you absorbing the tension, redirecting the blame, keeping things running smoothly. When you withdrew that role, the imbalance showed. It's like watching someone perform confidently under perfect lighting, only for the lights to suddenly cut out. Same person, same stage, but now every crack is visible. You didn't turn the lights off to embarrass them. You just stopped paying the electric bill for their performance. Here's the part that really matters. People show who they are fastest when control is no longer guaranteed. When you disengaged, the impatience crept out. The entitlement became obvious. The manipulation lost its subtlety. The lack of accountability stopped being deniable. You didn't narrate any of it. You didn't have to. Others noticed, and worse for them, they noticed too. That awareness is what follows them around now. You might be wondering why this weighs on them more than a public call-out ever could. Because public accusations can be dismissed. They can be reframed as bitterness, jealousy, or exaggeration. Quiet consequences can't. There's no villain to point at, no story to twist, no emotional outburst to discredit. Just the same behaviors repeating in different rooms with different people, producing the same results. Patterns don't argue, they just exist. Think of it this way. Imagine someone digging themselves deeper into a hole, fully convinced no one is paying attention. You don't shout, you don't intervene, you simply stop pulling them back up. Eventually, gravity does the rest. When they finally look up and realize no one pushed them, the truth hits harder than any accusation ever could. You weren't attacking them, you just weren't saving them anymore. That's what made your exit so devastating. Your restraint removed every defense they usually hide behind. They can't say you were dramatic. They can't say you exaggerated. They can't claim you acted out of emotion. All they're left with is the timeline. You stepped away calmly, and after that, things unraveled. That sequence is impossible to ignore. There's a line chosen ones need to remember here. the most threatening thing to someone who relies on control is a person who observes without reacting. You became that observer. Your silence wasn't passive, it was precise. Without you stabilizing the environment, the tension they create had nowhere to go. People around them felt it. The atmosphere shifted. You didn't need to explain a thing. Behavior told the story better than words ever could. And this is where doubt sometimes creeps in for you. You ask yourself, did I do enough? The answer is yes. Because the most effective actions don't always look dramatic in the moment. They look like distance. They look like composure. They look like leaving with your integrity intact. Over time, that contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Your calm highlights their chaos. Your discipline exposes their impulsiveness. Your quiet departure leaves them face to face with themselves. You didn't leak information. You revealed character. And once character is revealed to the right people, it doesn't reset. It follows them into new situations, new relationships, new attempts to regain control. The mask doesn't sit the same once it's slipped. You didn't chase revenge. You let reality handle it. And that's exactly why they can't forget you. Number 4. While they reacted in real time, you moved ahead of the outcome. They were swinging at the moment while you were already standing at the finish line. That's the part they still can't digest. You didn't meet them where they were emotionally. You didn't wrestle in the noise. You didn't try to win the moment. You played past it. And chosen one, that's a level of control most people never develop because it requires patience, restraint, and an understanding of outcomes instead of impulses. While they were reacting second by second, you were operating from the end result backward. That difference alone decided everything. They were counting on chaos. They expected an emotional spill they could shape, exaggerate, or weaponize. That's their comfort zone. When things get loud, they feel powerful. When emotions flare, they know exactly how to redirect the energy to protect themselves. But you didn't give them that. You didn't erupt. You didn't defend. You didn't chase clarity in the middle of confusion. You paused. You observed. You waited. And that calm didn't look passive to them. It looked dangerous, because people who depend on reaction don't know what to do when the room goes quiet. Understand this clearly. Fury is easy to manage, predictable, temporary. It burns hot and dies fast. What unsettles people like that is stillness with intent. Someone who doesn't rush to speak. Someone who doesn't explain themselves mid-storm. Someone who lets events reveal patterns instead of interrupting them. That's what you did. Your silence wasn't uncertainty. It was alignment. You weren't frozen. You were focused. Every response you withheld narrowed their options. Every step you delayed sharpened your position. Picture this: one person throwing wild punches, full of noise and effort, convinced aggression equals dominance. The other person barely moves, just enough to stay out of reach. No counter-strike, no taunts, just space. Over time, the one swinging starts breathing harder. Their arms get heavy. Their confidence leaks out. They realize something's wrong, not because they're losing loudly, but because nothing is landing. That's exactly how your composure worked. You didn't drain them by fighting back. You drained them by not feeding the fight. Here's the mechanism they never prepare for. People who manipulate depend on feedback. Facial expressions, tone changes, emotional spikes. That information tells them how to adjust, where to push, when to pull back. When you stopped providing that data, their entire system broke down. They were left guessing timing, guessing intent, guessing whether their moves even mattered anymore. And uncertainty is brutal for people who need control. It keeps them awake. It makes them replay conversations. It forces them to question moments they thought were secure. You might ask yourself, if I was so composed, why didn't they just disengage? Because precision creates doubt, and doubt doesn't fade on its own. They keep scanning the past, trying to locate the moment you stepped ahead of them. They analyze your pauses, your word choices, your restraint. Not because they miss you, but because they're trying to understand how the advantage slipped away without warning. Not knowing when you outpace them is what keeps their mind circling the same loop. Think of a strategist in a game who suddenly realizes every option is blocked, every move anticipated. They're not losing because of bad luck. They're losing because the other person already accounted for their tendencies. That's what happened here. You didn't rush the conclusion. You let their behavior repeat until the ending was inevitable. That's not hesitation, that's planning. There's a line that hits straight through their defenses. Noise is often a cover for weakness, while real control doesn't need an audience. You never gave them scenes they could reinterpret later. No outbursts they could point to, no emotional chaos they could blame. All that remained was a clean reality they couldn't edit. You weren't unstable, you weren't confused, you were ahead. That's why they keep revisiting the final moments. Losing in a storm is easy to rationalize. Losing to someone who stayed composed forces responsibility, and responsibility is the one thing they avoid at all costs. You didn't overpower them, you outpositioned them. You didn't overwhelm them with force, you outlasted them with clarity. Chosen one, take this as confirmation. Moving ahead of the outcome doesn't look dramatic in real time. It looks quiet, it looks slow, it looks lonely. But when the dust settles, it becomes undeniable. You weren't reacting to what was happening. You were already living in what was coming next. And that kind of defeat, the kind where someone realizes too late that you were never playing the same game, doesn't fade. It follows them, long after the moment passes, long after the noise stops. Before we move on, take a moment to support the work behind this message. If this content is resonating with you, liking the video and subscribing to the channel helps it reach more people who need this kind of clarity and strength. If you're able and feel aligned, you can also show support through Super Thanks. Every contribution goes directly toward the time, research, and creative effort it takes to deliver inspiring, high-energy, life-shifting videos consistently. There's no pressure, just appreciation. Your support keeps this momentum strong and allows the team to keep raising the level. Number 5. The exact moment they discovered your loyalty wasn't unlimited. There is a specific moment that keeps replaying in their mind, whether they admit it or not. Not the day you left, not the last conversation, but the exact second they understood something they never prepared for. Your loyalty was never infinite. It was conditional, and once those conditions were violated long enough, it didn't weaken. It ended cleanly, permanently. That realization hit them harder than any argument ever could, because it forced them to confront a truth they were comfortable avoiding. They truly believed you would always stay, not out of love alone, but out of habit. In their mental framework, you were reliable in a way that felt permanent. Someone who would bend, adjust, and tolerate without ever fully withdrawing. They treated your loyalty like a renewable resource, something they could drain and expect to refill itself. Each crossed line came with the assumption that you'd redraw it. Each boundary ignored came with the expectation that you'd soften it later. For a while, that assumption worked, and that's exactly why they grew careless. What stunned them wasn't your departure. It was how quietly it happened. No emotional eruption, no dramatic ultimatum, no speech outlining your pain. One day, the access they were used to simply stopped. The tolerance they relied on evaporated, and suddenly the dynamic they thought was unbreakable no longer existed. When loyalty ends without noise, there's nothing to negotiate, no leverage, no way to twist the narrative. Just a closed door and the realization that it won't reopen. Think of it like this. Someone keeps borrowing from you over and over, never returning what they take. They joke about it because you've never made it an issue. Then one day, you stop handing anything over. No lecture, no anger, just a calm refusal. In that moment, they understand something uncomfortable. Your generosity was never a weakness. It was a decision, and decisions can change. That single shift reframes the entire relationship. That's what happened here. Here's the truth most people avoid acknowledging. Loyalty without respect doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. When you finally saw that clearly, something inside you settled. You didn't harden. You didn't become cruel. You became precise. And precision is terrifying to people who benefited from your flexibility. Honesty removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is where they hid. Once you became honest with yourself, the game ended without a fight. They replay your exit because it didn't align with their expectations. They assumed you'd pause, that you'd reconsider, that you'd come back after some time with the same patience you always showed. They were counting on one more reset, one more excuse, one more cycle. Instead, they got certainty, and certainty leaves no loopholes. You didn't threaten to leave, you left. You didn't negotiate respect. You required it by removing yourself. You might ask yourself why this still affects them so deeply if they didn't treat you well. The answer is simple and uncomfortable. They valued your availability more than your presence. As long as you were accessible, they felt secure. When that access disappeared, the loss registered instantly. Losing connection is painful. Losing access is destabilizing. Your absence forced them to recognize something they ignored for too long. They didn't lose you because of a single error. They lost you because they assumed your choice to stay would never change. There's a line that cuts straight through the confusion. You didn't walk away from them. You stopped walking away from yourself. That realization doesn't fade. It travels with them into new situations. Every time they test someone else's limits, your memory surfaces. Not because you're being compared emotionally, but because you represent the moment they learned that loyalty has a boundary. Push it far enough and it doesn't stretch. It snaps. You didn't leave to prove a point. You didn't exit with the intention of teaching a lesson. But the lesson landed anyway. It landed because your decision was calm, firm, and irreversible. That kind of ending forces reflection, whether someone wants it or not. They now understand that loyalty isn't a guarantee, it's an agreement. And agreements dissolve when one side keeps violating the terms. Chosen one, this is where your power becomes undeniable. You didn't punish them. You didn't seek validation. You simply withdrew what was no longer being respected. That's not abandonment. That's self-alignment, and alignment creates consequences without effort. They can't forget you because you were the moment they learned that loyalty isn't endless and that some people only realize its value after it's gone. Number 6. What stopped working in their world? After you were gone. What collapsed in their world after you were gone wasn't companionship, it was comprehension. You weren't just someone who showed up. You were the one person who actually saw them without needing a performance. And that's the loss they still can't label, because it doesn't fit into simple categories like missing or regret. They didn't just lose a presence. They lost the rare experience of being understood without having to explain themselves. You caught the meaning behind their pauses, the tension behind their jokes, the fear hidden under confidence and control. You read the subtext while everyone else only heard the words, and you did it without judgment. That's what they failed to grasp while you were there. Most people in their life were background noise, conversation fillers, temporary stimulation. You were different. You were alignment. You noticed patterns before they repeated. You understood moods before they turned into messes. You didn't need breakdowns or confessions to know what was going on, and you didn't weaponize that awareness. You didn't try to fix them. You didn't expose them. You simply held the truth calmly, and that made them feel seen in a way they weren't used to. That's why your absence hit like a system failure. Everything kept running, but nothing worked the same. Think of it like this. Imagine moving through life surrounded by people who technically speak your language, but none of them really understand what you mean. Then there's one person who does. One person who catches the nuance, the intent, the unsaid. When that person leaves, conversations don't stop, but they lose weight. That's what happened. When you stepped away, the structure didn't collapse loudly. It hollowed out. Suddenly, nothing landed the way it used to. Here's the part most people don't admit. People don't crave others. They crave how grounded they feel around certain people. You were grounding. Without you, things feel scattered. The laughs are there, but they fade fast. The attention shows up, but it doesn't satisfy. Distractions multiply because depth is missing. And they don't understand why, because while you were present, your clarity felt normal. Consistency hides value until it's removed. Picture someone who's lived with blurry vision their entire life. They don't complain because they don't know better. Then one day, everything sharpens. Colors make sense. Details click. When that clarity disappears, the blur becomes unbearable. That was your role. You sharpened their world. When you left, the fog returned. You weren't just comfort, you were coherence. And when that's gone, the silence isn't empty, it's confronting. You didn't leave a space that could be replaced. You left an absence that keeps getting noticed. That's why they can't forget you. Number 7. The stability they assumed was permanent. Wasn't. They confused consistency with commitment, and that misunderstanding is what collapsed everything. Chosen one, they got comfortable not because the connection was unbreakable, but because it was familiar. Familiarity numbed them. It made them sloppy. It made them careless. They treated your presence like background noise instead of a privilege, like something that would always be there, no matter how little effort they put in. Time, to them, felt like ownership. Repetition felt like security. Because you had stayed before, they assumed you always would. Same role, same patience, same availability. In their head, the past was proof you were locked in, and that belief gave them permission to stop showing up properly. Here's where they miscalculated. People who lean on familiarity stop evolving. They don't grow, they don't adjust, they don't protect what they have. They operate on autopilot, assuming the other person will keep filling the same space, no matter how poorly it's treated. Respect fades. Effort thins out, choice disappears, and slowly, without realizing it, they replace intention with assumption. That's not loyalty, that's laziness dressed up as confidence. You didn't break that pattern with drama. You didn't announce a deadline. You didn't threaten to leave. You shifted quietly. Your standards moved forward. Your tolerance ran out. Your energy stopped matching an outdated dynamic. And when that happened, the routine they depended on lost its grip. They reached for the version of you they were used to, and it wasn't there anymore. That moment hit like the ground dropping out from under them. Think of someone leaning on the same railing every day, never testing it because it's always held. Then one day, it's gone. The shock isn't the fall itself. It's realizing how blindly they trusted something without ever maintaining it. That's what your exit felt like to them. Not betrayal, exposure. Exposure of how little they actually invested while assuming everything would stay the same. Familiarity has a dangerous side effect. It dulls awareness. The mind stops protecting what feels guaranteed. That's why they didn't guard the connection. They thought time would do the work. They thought history would carry the weight. They thought your loyalty was automatic. It wasn't. It was a choice, and you chose differently. This hits harder than chaos ever could, because chaos has an explanation. Broken routine doesn't. There's no single moment they can point to. No argument to blame. just the realization that the dynamic stopped working because you stopped fitting into it. You didn't lock them out. You simply stopped leaving yourself unlocked. And now they're forced to face the most uncomfortable truth of all. It wasn't love holding it together. It was habit. Once that snapped, there was nothing solid underneath. And that realization doesn't fade. That's why they can't forget you. Number 8, you set a benchmark that turned every comparison against them. You didn't win by being overly kind. You won by being unmistakably real, and that's the part they can't reverse. You didn't sink into their level, didn't copy their tactics, didn't let bitterness turn you into someone unrecognizable. Even when they tested you, even when they pushed buttons on purpose, you stayed composed, calm, self-respecting. And that restraint did more damage than any emotional outburst ever could. Because when someone expects retaliation and gets dignity instead, it exposes a contrast they can't escape. Most people anticipate drama when things end. Anger, pettiness, some kind of mess they can point at and say, "See, that's why it failed." You didn't hand them that excuse. You responded with maturity, with balance, with a level of self-control that quietly highlighted how little they were offering in return. You didn't step down to meet them where they were operating. You stayed exactly where you were, and that made the distance between you impossible to ignore. Think about it like this. Someone spends years eating whatever is quick and cheap, convincing themselves it's fine because it's familiar. Then one day, they're given something made with care, intention, and quality. At first, they don't appreciate it. They even criticize it. But once it's gone, nothing tastes the same again. That's what you did. You recalibrated their sense of what normal looks like, and now every replacement feels hollow. Here's why it sticks so deeply. When respect is paired with boundaries, the mind doesn't forget it. You weren't passive and you weren't harsh. You stood firm without becoming cold. That combination creates a reference point. From that moment on, every interaction they have gets weighed against how you showed up. Not consciously at first, but it's there, in the pauses, in the disappointments, in the moments where something feels off and they can't explain why. You might ask yourself why they didn't appreciate this when you were there. The answer is simple. Some people only understand value after they trade it for something cheaper. While you were present, your consistency blended into the background. Once you left, it stood out as rare. Imagine breathing fresh air every day without thinking about it, then moving somewhere heavy and polluted. At first, it's subtle, then it's undeniable. That's your absence. You were clarity in a cluttered environment. Once you stepped away, the contrast became unavoidable. You didn't ruin them. You raised the bar, and now everything else falls short. You didn't leave behind chaos. You left behind a benchmark. And benchmarks don't disappear. They linger, they follow, they remind. That's why they can't move forward cleanly. You didn't just exit their life. You upgraded the standard by which everything else is judged. Number 9. What was revoked wasn't you, it was access. What disappeared wasn't you, it was their permission to reach you, and that distinction is what's choking them now. You were never interchangeable, never a slot that could be refilled with someone similar. You were access, limited, specific, one time, and once that access expired, it didn't reroute or refresh. It shut down completely. They keep replaying it because deep down they know this wasn't bad timing or bad luck. This was a revoked pass they assumed would never be taken away. They acted like they owned your presence because you were consistent. They confused your steadiness with permanence. They mistook availability for obligation. That was their error. What you brought into their world wasn't a default setting. It was earned, maintained, and conditional. You showed up with awareness, restraint, and depth at the same time. That blend is rare. It doesn't come around twice just because someone wants a redo. When respect slipped, when growth stalled, when awareness wasn't returned, the door closed. Not dramatically, decisively. Here's what really stings them. They didn't just lose a person they could text or call. They lost an environment. You were the one who made situations feel grounded before chaos could take over. You read the room before explanations were needed. You stayed centered when pressure hit. That wasn't a personality quirk. That was perception. And once that perception leaves, everything feels noisier, harsher, less precise. It's like stepping into a space that instantly sharpened your focus, then realizing it's gone forever. Every place after that feels wrong, even if it looks fine on the surface. This lingers because the mind doesn't catalog rare experiences the same way it stores everyday ones. Ordinary connections get replaced. Exceptional ones become benchmarks. Once a benchmark is set, everything else gets measured against it. That's why nothing feels quite right to them now. Not because others are lacking, but because you quietly raised the standard without announcing it. You might wonder why they still think about you when they treated you casually. Simple, disregard doesn't erase worth. It only postpones recognition. People often realize what they had after the door shuts, not while it's open. And when that realization hits, it doesn't fade quickly. Think of someone erasing a document without realizing it was the original draft. No duplicate, no restore button. They can recreate something similar, but it never carries the same clarity. That's your role in their story. You weren't a replaceable section. You were the defining upgrade. They didn't lose you. They lost entry into a version of life that only existed when you were there. And once access is gone, it doesn't come back wearing a different face. Number 10, the loop ended the second you declined to repeat it. The moment you chose not to go around one more time, the whole machine seized up. Nothing mystical, nothing dramatic, just cause and effect. They didn't lose momentum because something external changed. They lost it because you stopped supplying what kept the system alive. You were the constant. You were the stabilizer. You were the one making repetition feel normal. And when you quietly declined to keep playing your role, the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. That's why this shook them so deeply. They were built on routine, not resilience. They survived by looping. Same patterns, same justifications, same reset button pressed every time things got uncomfortable. Repetition gave them safety because repetition removes accountability. If tomorrow looks like yesterday, no one has to evolve. No one has to admit fault. No one has to confront their behavior. And they assumed you'd stay there forever, doing what you'd always done. Softening the edges, explaining things away, making it easier than it should have been. But you didn't. And that single refusal rewrote everything. What stunned them wasn't anger. It was finality. You didn't raise your voice or make threats. You didn't demand understanding or offer a closing speech. You simply withdrew your energy. And when you did that, the pattern didn't slow down. It stopped completely. No reset, no familiar return, just silence where motion used to be, like someone pedaling hard on a stationary bike, convinced the burn means progress, until the power cuts and they realize they never left the room. That's the moment they're stuck replaying. Here's the reality they can't escape. Cycles only exist because someone agrees to keep them alive. The instant one person steps out, the illusion disintegrates. Your decision forced them to face something they avoided for a long time, that without you smoothing things over, the behavior stands naked. No buffer, no excuses, no one to translate chaos into something tolerable. And that exposure hits harder than any argument ever could. You might ask yourself why this landed heavier than confrontation, because confrontation gives warning. It gives them time to adjust their tactics, rehearse apologies, reshape the narrative. What you did gave them none of that. You didn't argue the pattern, you removed yourself from it, like pulling the emergency brake on a train that's been circling the same track for years. The noise, the panic, the confusion, it all came from realizing the destination never existed, only movement. Now they're forced to view the pattern from the outside, to see how repetitive it was, how much it relied on your tolerance, how fragile it became the moment you chose differently. And that realization is brutal because it strips away every comfortable excuse. It was never timing, it was never circumstances, it was behavior. They can't restart it because it required you. They can't recreate it because anyone new will notice what you once endured. And even if they try, your absence is the reminder that the loop only worked because you kept stepping back onto the track. You didn't end it with chaos, you ended it with clarity. And clarity doesn't echo for a moment, it lingers. That's why they can't forget you. And this is where everything comes together. When you look back, you'll realize you didn't just leave a situation, you closed a chapter that no longer deserved access to you. That choice changed the trajectory, not with noise, but with certainty. If this message resonated, take a moment to support the work by liking the video and subscribing to the channel so this energy reaches more people who need it. Drop 77 in the comments to mark that you're locked in and share this with someone who's ready to step out of old patterns. Your support keeps this momentum moving forward.